to. So we do. Good afternoon to you, buon après-midi à vous, buon pomeriggio a tutti voi. Guten Tag, buenas tardes a ustedes. Welcome to Paris and to the International School of Astrophysics, Daniel Chalonge, Hector de Vega, for this 15th session in the program of this year. And it's a great pleasure and a great honor to welcome here today again Professor Dr. Peter Coles from the National University of Ireland and Maynooth, and head of the Department of Theoretical Physics there, head editor of and founder of the Open Journal of Astrophysics, who precisely present to us open access, open science and open access in astrophysics and cosmology and the Open Journal of Astrophysics. Briefly, for those who didn't come to the, I see new participants, Peter Coles was born in Newcastle in northeast of England, grew there and was educated also there, Royal Grammar School, and then first degree in Magdalen College, University of Cambridge, a PhD 1988 in Sussex, supervisor John Barrow, who sadly passed away just 1 year ago, 25 September last year, to whom was lecturing the school, to whom we paid tribute, and then moved to Queen Mary's College and Westfield College, and then moved to Nottingham to become professor of in astrophysics, set it up an astrophysics astronomy group there, and then moved to Cardiff, and where too was head subhead of the school of astrophysics astronomy there. Came to return to Sussex again for high responsibilities too, and then after moved to his present place and position in Maynooth, Ireland, which is said 24 kilometers west from Dublin. Very well-known cosmology, large-scale pioneer in many sense, large-scale structure, statistical properties of that, and the fluctuations and theoretician. And also I would like to mention magnetic fields, who is in early universe, which is an important non-Gaussian of the non-Gaussian statistic in the fluctuations. His dissertation was at the time it was the 80s, stochastic fluctuations, stochastic cosmological fluctuations in the early universe. Not only researchers have written books, and in particular one book which is said classic in cosmology. We use it for. It's very useful. Is the book you can see here. It was in 1995 with Lukin and Francesco Lukin, cosmologist from Padova, Italian, and unfortunately passed away also rather young. And other textbooks with George Ellis on general relativity from Cambridge University, a monograph from Cosmos to Chaos for Oxford University Press, to and monograph, and more more accessible books for public in general, but very interesting. Einstein and the eclipse, the solar eclipse, and the famous, and the Hawking, the mind of God. And in particular, in this school, appeared for the first time in 1995 with very interesting lectures. At that time was George Smoot, Igor Novikov, Valery Floro, Gabriele Veneziano. It was in Paris, just a work colloquium for us with Hector, and it was Joe Freeman. The subjects were all the subjects which are here, and Daniel Bojanowski, Marcelo Greiser, and particularly I would like to mention that Peter lectured there on a subject very interesting, large-scale structure without cosmological simulation, without any simulations. And one of the participants who made a surprise coming without, we didn't know, was Wolfgang Rindler, and passing by Paris to go to Vienna, to Austria, his country, and participated actively in the colloquium. And we have seen, and I pay tribute also. He passed away 2 years ago, but at the age of 94. And then after I will finish now. Peter came to Erice. He showed some of the souvenirs, and they are also illustrated with theoretical lectures in cosmology, the wave mechanics of large-scale structure, statistics of the cosmological fluctuations, and they have also a very nice left a very nice remembering there. So with that, it's a pleasure again to welcome Peter and all participants who joined today. And Peter, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Norma, for that lovely introduction. And of course, you mentioned in the course of the introduction a number of sort of technical talks that I gave. And earlier this summer, I gave a colloquium in this series, which was not particularly technical, but was nevertheless a specialist talk. So in the words of Monty Python, I think I'll say now, and now for something completely different, because this is not a science talk as such. It's about the publication and dissemination of science rather than the science itself. I hope you find it interesting, and I hope we have time for some questions later on. I'm sure we will, because this presentation is not particularly long. I'll say two things about my first slide here, and also my background. As you realize, this is not actually my house that I'm sitting in behind there. There's a shot of the spire of the chapel of St. Patrick's College, which is on the Maynooth University campus, towards one side. But the main building behind me there is the library. We have a rather fantastic library and an extremely excellent library staff who are very interested in publication methods. So we actually have a Maynooth University Press, which is just getting up and into full steam, and is actually specializing, has a part of it which specializes in open access. And they have helped me particularly a lot with the Open Journal project. So that background should remind myself and all of you that actually Maynooth University Library We still have a library instead of a learning resources unit or whatever they're called in a lot of places now. So, and so I just want to say thanks to them, and you should be very well aware of the key role that they've played in this project, which I'm going to talk about. The other minor thing that I'll mention about the first slide here is that it's got my Twitter handle at the bottom, and people say, well, you're a theorist. Why are you putting the word telescope on your Twitter feed? Because you don't know anything about telescopes, which is actually true. But the point about telescoper is it's actually an anagram of my name. That's the only reason why I picked it. So I just think it was kind of funny that my Peter Coles actually turns out to anagrammatize to telescoper. That's the only reason. I'm not claiming any astronomical expertise particularly. So as I said at the beginning, this is going to be a fairly short presentation, and I'll just go through some key things. I'm going to start off talking about open access generally, so that you kind of know some of the terminology and things like that. And then I'll talk about the Open Journal of Astrophysics. And in the course of that, I'm going to take my life in my hands and actually try and contact the website and show you how it works live, as it were. So I'll have to stop the presentation to do that. I've never done that over Zoom before, so it might not work. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about our friend, the academic publishing industry. So we're all scientists, and we all know there's pressure on us to publish, and most of the time publish our scientific results. And there's pressure on us to publish in what are called prestigious journals. You know, when we're looking for promotion or for jobs or whatever, there's people count rather seriously publications which are seen to be in high prestige journals like Nature or Physical Review Letters or things like that. Now that's basically the landscape of publishing that we grow up in, and I'm no different from anyone else here. When I was a PhD student, I was told you should publish in such and such a journal, and this looks like a paper for such and such a journal. And my supervisor, the late John Barrow, was a very good writer, far greater writer than me, but he also had a good eye for where he thought things should be published. And it was only later that when I published my first paper that there was a couple of things struck me. One is that my first paper was actually in Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, which many of you would probably have published in. I was quite surprised at two things. One is that in those days, an author had to sign away all their copyright for the paper to the publisher, which at that time I think was Blackwood's Scientific. I can't remember the name of the publisher there, but it's now a different publisher. And now I think you don't have to sign away your ownership of your text. But it seemed very strange that. And the other thing is when I boasted to my friends about having published a paper, they said, oh, how much did you get for it? You know, if you publish an article in a magazine, you generally get paid. And in fact, you don't get paid anything, of course, for academic publishers. In fact, you kind of give it to the journal, and the journal then sells it. And after a while, it struck me that the whole thing about the academic publishing industry is that it's basically the business model can't fail, because it's rather like a restaurant where the customers have to bring all the own ingredients to the restaurant, pay the restaurateur for the use of the kitchen in order to cook the food, and then take the food into the restaurant and buy it from the restaurant. So they basically pay to produce it. In some cases, we pay to produce it because there are page charges or whatever for the journal. We cook it, and the journal kind of publishes it, and then we buy it back through subscriptions. So the community buys it back. So it's kind of there's very little that the publisher has to do to create added value to that. All of the added value is produced by the academics, the academic community. So it's no surprise there that 2 years ago, and I haven't looked up the numbers more recently than this, the global revenues of the academic publishing industry across all disciplines were about 22 billion euros per year. That's quite a lot of money, and it actually exceeds the total revenues of the global revenues of the recorded music industry. That's largely because the music industry revenues are actually going down because of digital downloads and things, and it's difficult to for them to keep their revenues up. But the academic publishing industry revenues are also going up. And basically because what they do to publish journals is essentially not done by them, but done by the people who are trying to write the articles and disseminate the science. The profit margins are huge in academic publishers. So 45% is typical number for a publisher like Elsevier, for example. That's a private publisher. And those are bigger margins than you get at big manufacturing things or software companies. Apple, Google, and BMW don't have margins as big as that. Now, the worst offenders in this case are the big four publishers, which we've all dealt with probably, Elsevier, Springer, John Wiley and Sons, which actually published the book that Norma brandished earlier, and Taylor and Francis. And so all of these publishers actually publish astronomical and cosmological journals of various kinds as well. And they make huge profits from that. So you basically submit the paper, sign away the journal. It's refereed, usually by the community, members of the community. The editor's probably a member of the community who might or might not get paid something for that. And then you have to buy the product back. Your library has to buy the product back. So it's basically, there's no way you could not make a huge profit on that activity because somebody else does all the work and you take a large chunk of the revenues. Now, the other thing that's happened since I started my career back in the 80s is that we've gone from print. So I'm old enough to remember when all journals were print journals, right? And so you had to wait with excitement each month, every few weeks, for your physical copy of monthly notices to arrive. There were only paper journals in those days, and that of course slowed everything down rather a lot. Now most journals are. In fact, most of the journals like Monthly Notices have phased out their paper copies, their hard copies, and basically just run online journals. And we were always told that the digital revolution would reduce the cost of publishing to the extent that subscriptions for these journals, which are pretty expensive, would go down as a consequence of it being much cheaper. They don't have to print and bind and distribute all the copies of that. Well, in fact, they haven't gone down, they've gone up. And that's largely in order to maintain or increase profit margins for the journals. Now, some journals, of course, are published or owned or administered by learned societies. Monthly Notices, for example, is published by the Royal Astronomical Society. They're kind of owned by them. It's actually published by a professional publisher, a private publisher. But that publisher itself makes money out of it, and the Royal Astronomical Society makes profits from that as well. In fact, most of its income stream for the Royal Astronomical Society comes from the journal revenue from Monthly Notices and its other journals. Now, you could argue that that's very good because it's not the same as just being pure profit for the commercial publishers like Elsevier and whatnot. But in fact, it always makes me very uncomfortable because what you have is a learned society like the Royal Astronomical Society running a whole load of activities which it does on the basis of income that it generates, which purports to be for the publication and dissemination of scientific knowledge. In other words, it comes out of our library budgets. And it's not at all transparent when you're looking at a university finance. Library budgets are under pressure. Why is it right for all of those other activities, some of which may be good and supportive? I'd support many of the things the Royal Astronomical Society does, but that money is actually essentially siphoned off library budgets, which are under pressure and which really should be used for library type activities, making science results available. So the commercial publishers are the worst offenders, but I also think it's not entirely it's questionable about the fairness of learned societies funding their activities from our library budgets. Let's just put it that way. So that's the kind of landscape we're in, and it's a landscape which is changing, and it's changed quite a lot in my lifetime. But basically, there's a lot of inertia in it. This whole model of you send your papers to a publisher, the publisher organizes it to be peer reviewed, and so on, and then it's published and it's funded. You have to buy a subscription in order to access it. Still exists. And I would say probably the majority of scientific papers are published under that model still. Now, my angle on this, and I'll tell you, just to go back to the previous slide, I had a sort of revelation moment while I was sitting in a staff meeting when I was working back in Cardiff, because the money was short during the time of the financial crisis over a decade ago. And they were talking about cutting journal subscriptions because there wasn't enough money. And the department that I worked in essentially had to, at that time, had a journal subscription package from the Institute of Physics, which actually has its own publishing wing. In fact, publishes the AAS journals as well, published by Institute of Physics Publishing, in case you didn't know that. That's AppJ, and AppJ Supplement are all published by the Institute of Physics, which is a profit-making company, most of whose profits go to the Institute of Physics. So it's a wholly owned subsidiary of what is a learned society, essentially. But this bundle of journals that was being discussed was costing tens of thousands per year for the subscription. And I was thinking, well, we could have some PhD students instead of paying that. Why are we paying so much money for this thing? When, for myself, as I'll explain later, I didn't really use journals very much at all. I got most of my science from the arXiv. And that's the point that I'm going to talk about in the second part of this talk. So why should we have to be paying for these things? And what about an interested person in another country, or somebody who's not working in a university that has a subscription, who's paying for research in astrophysics and other blue sky subjects through their tax money? Why shouldn't they be able to get access to these publications? They may not understand them, but in principle, I think they should be able to, anyone should be able to access this stuff. It's actually scientific research in these areas and in many others is a public good, and it should be available to the public. So that was my first, it's the expense, the extreme expense of subscriptions, and the fact that it effectively puts all of this scientific knowledge behind a paywall, so most people can't have access to it. Going further along this line of thought, I would say that there's plenty of evidence, in fact, that open science is actually better for science. The general public gets very suspicious about scientific results that are hidden away and not accessible behind secret documents, hidden documents. We have controversies coming up about all kinds of things. Climate change, for example, where some people have propagated the perception that the data are being fiddled and so on. And if it's not out in the open, it's easy for those kind of conspiracy theories to propagate. So open access basically means scientific results should be available for anyone free of charge. That's the basic principle of open access publishing. the question is, does it go far enough? That's just open access publishing. That's all I'm really going to talk about in this talk. But you could argue that open access publishing is nowhere near enough. For example, one of the key aspects of scientific results is that they should be reproducible. And if you're going to take open science seriously, that doesn't mean just writing up the results and putting them somewhere that's publicly available. It actually means open data, putting your data out publicly. Now, actually, lots of astrophysics does that. But dumping a huge amount of raw data from a satellite on a disk somewhere does not constitute open science, because somebody would have to reinvent the analysis pipeline and all the other stuff. So if you're really going to go along this line, you should have open access software, analysis pipelines, and all the rest of it. So that's a topic which is worthy of discussion, but I'm going to just restrict myself to open access publishing for now. And that will be when I come to the Open Journal. Okay, so here's some, so in the last probably 6 or 7 years, there's been a growing movement about open access publishing, embraced by some fields more than others. I'll come back to the arXiv and the fact that in practice in astrophysics, we've all been doing open access publishing for quite a long time anyway. In a rather unofficial way. But I'll just do this sort of, the terminology that's associated with these different forms of publishing have evolved. And evolved in a very confusing way. And so I'm going to just give you here the simplest translation of these terms that are used quite often in the open access publishing world. So first of all, there's gold open access. Now, gold open access really means that a paper is free to read at the point of publication. That's what it means. So basically, anyone can go to a website and read a paper free of charge. Now, for most of the academic publishing industry, gold open access means that the authors have to pay upfront to publish their paper. And that's called it's actually not an author process, it's an article processing charge. I think the author is being, not being processed, he's being fleeced actually, but not processed necessarily. So the article processing charge, or APC, which for many journals is many thousands of dollars, So the Astrophysical Journal has just gone to gold open access from next year. And for a typical article, you're going to pay $2,000 or something up front. I mean, that's the same model as they had with page charges previously, actually. Now, this model where it's free to readers at the point of publication involves an APC, largely in order for the publisher to maintain revenue when the subscription goes, because you don't have to pay a subscription anymore. So the APC gives you some idea of the profits that the publisher is making from the paper. Now, they will tell you that the APC involves typesetting. You know, we typeset most of our stuff ourselves. The only real thing that is added value that's added here is reviewing and editorial control. Now, the reviewers are normally not paid, so they don't come into the APC. But when an article is published, it goes into various systems where the metadata are indexed and stored, and as citations get picked up and so on. Now, the Open Journal, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, actually does that. And I'll let you in as a sneak preview, a typical paper that we publish in the Open Journal is indexed through a system called Crossref, which many of the big journals use as well. And a paper to be indexed in Crossref, the metadata, so it can be picked up by all the citation engines, it costs $1 per paper. So if you're paying $2,000 for your APC, you've got to ask yourself, where does the other $1,999 go? I'll leave that with you for now. Now, the alternative main classification of open access is called green. And green, again, is a rather broad, I tend to call this first one fool's gold, for example, because there's no justification from publishing alone for the high APCs that charge. They're just to maintain profit. Now, green open access is the friendlier one to authors. It's free to authors and readers. So the route which green open access is mainly achieved is through self-archiving. So you might publish a paper in a traditional journal, and then perhaps after some months of embargo time, you pop the paper on the arXiv, and then anyone can see it on the arXiv. You're still in a traditional journal, but you can self-archive. It could be the arXiv, or it could be your institutional repository. And for example, Maynooth Library has its own repository. We put our papers on there. So maybe possibly after an embargo period. Now, so basically that means, and incidentally, arXiv, I'd say something about archiving. Maybe I'll leave that until later. Oops, I got too quick on the draw there. Now, you see, the Open Journal, which I'm going to talk about shortly, is officially classified as Diamond Open Access. And Diamond Open Access is a subset of gold. I'm glad there are no chemists here, because this idea that diamond is a special case of gold is a very strange way to classify it. Diamond Open Access is free to authors and readers, but it satisfies the criterion for being gold because it's free at the point of publication. That's the key thing. But we don't charge an APC for a Diamond journal. It's free to submit to, and it's free to read. So it has aspects of both of these. Now, many funding agencies have some kind of mandate for open access publication. The European, a group of European countries have come together to form a thing called Coalition S, which has Plan S, which basically mandates that everything that's funded by any research that's not commercial in confidence or can't be published for ethical reasons is published in an open access forum of some sort. And that, I think that's going to happen because they realize the argument that I presented earlier, that basically they're funding this, and so it's coming out of European taxpayers' money, so it should go back to the public. Should they wish to consult it, they should be available for them. Okay, so you will find in many countries that some form of open access is mandatory, and they're not all consistent, of course, but I should mention, I've talked about monthly notices and I've talked about the Astrophysical Journal. I'll just mention that Astronomy and Astrophysics actually encourages its authors to self-archive in this way. So there's they don't object to you putting a paper on arXiv after it's published in A&A. Some journals do not like you to do that, or insist on a long embargo period before you can put it on arXiv. Okay, so that's just some terminology. There's also bronze and platinum and all kinds of things, and it's rather silly how many words there are for open access, but the main classification is gold means it's free at the point of publication for a reader. Okay, so that's just classification. Now, of course, we have the advantage in astrophysics and cosmology that we have for 30 years had a repository which is basically an essential tool for research, disseminating research, and that's arXiv. Now, the 30th birthday of arXiv was quite recent. Now, I was, I think, a fairly late adopter of arXiv in the sense that I don't think I put a paper on until 1992. And those of you who've been around a bit will remember that the arXiv grew out of a thing that was basically an email preprint server. And then it gradually got better and better. And now it's kind of not really all that recognizable. It still has a fairly basic interface, but you'll see that the 30th anniversary reminder is actually on here. The arXiv is not free, of course. It's funded by universities that use it and institutions that use it. It's funded by donations, but it actually has a cost, which, if you work it out roughly, per paper that's stored on the arXiv is about $11 for the whole thing. You know, basically, to curate a paper costs about $11. Again, nowhere near $2,000. But that cost of doing that is hidden to the user, right? Now, I'm actually it's been a very long time since I've actually gone to a journal website to look at an article. I get everything from here and from the arXiv, and the only role the journal plays in this game is that it has a peer review. So if you see that it's been published, you know that it's been peer reviewed. And you can copy the journal reference from the arXiv field into your paper, and you don't even need to look at the journal you might check that the thing works correctly, but there's no need to go to the journal for this. So then you ask the question, why bother with a journal? What's the point? What's the point of all this expense? And the answer is, if you've got arXiv, then there's very little. So most new astrophysics research has been available on the arXiv as of green open access for 30 years or so. It wasn't most 30 years ago. It gradually came up, it gradually increased, but now it's most. The running costs amount to about $11 per paper. Who the hell looks at journals nowadays anyway? I don't. So why not do the only thing that a journal actually adds value to a paper, and that's the refereeing process. There are papers on arXiv which have not been refereed, and you need to know whether there's passed some kind of quality control. And so why not just referee an arXiv submission? And that's where the idea of an arXiv overlay journal came from. And that's what the Open Journal of Astrophysics is. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about that, but I noticed there's a couple of questions in the chat from so Philip has asked a question that even if the author wants it, it's not always the final version. Well, that's true, but when we do the overlay, there will be a specific version, which is the one that's been refereed. So the overlay points to a specific version. And then there's another question about copyright, which I think I've answered earlier. You know, the policy with monthly notices has actually changed. So over the years. Right, so we're now, I now wanted to, move on. So this is where the Open Journal of Astrophysics comes in. We had the idea of doing this many years ago, and I'm not going to go into all the details of the project. Myself and a group of like-minded individuals, including Chris Lintott, who's at Oxford, and Arthur Smith, who now works for GitHub, had the idea of making an arXiv overlay journal. In the beginning, I put some of my own money in to develop a basic overlay thing. I'll show you how that works. And we got it to a point where it was sort of a beta version, and we did actually publish some papers with that version, but it was difficult to make it stable across all the possible web browsers, because people who design web interfaces have to worry about the fact that people are using stupid browsers sometimes. And so it was proving difficult. I, at that time, also moved from Sussex and didn't have much time to spend on the project. So we decided to actually not persist with our own bespoke software for the overlay, but to use a proprietary publisher software platform called Scholastica, which actually a number of journals, other journals in mathematics and combinatorics also use as an overlay based on the arXiv. I should say that the model here is for the arXiv, but there's no reason why this kind of overlay journal couldn't work on any other kind of repository as well. I mean, institutional repositories that I was talking about earlier could work this way. So there's the website. You can have a look at it. I'm actually going to show you it at the end of this presentation to hope that it works. It's astro.theoj.org. The oj.org actually is a domain which has a number of other journals in it. One of our sister journals is called JOSS, J-O-S-S, which is the Journal of Open Source Software, which Arfon runs. And that basically, as the name suggests, does not just open access publishing, but actually making software available in a reviewed form online. So that's one of our sister publications. So what is the Open Journal of Astrophysics? Well, it's free. It's free to submit to, and it's free to read, because it's basically on the arXiv. So it's not entirely free, of course, because you have to be, there is some kind of gatekeeping at the arXiv. So you do have to be able to submit papers to the arXiv. But as I said before, the vast majority of papers which I see on the arXiv. It's an I'll show what the overlay means in a moment. It's based on the arXiv. It sits on top of the arXiv, and it corresponds to Diamond open access. So it's free for anyone. Now, of course, nothing's free. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and there's no such thing as a free publisher either. The budget for this journal is handled by Maynooth Academic Publishing, which is the library behind me. It's run from inside the library, and it costs to run it the massive amount of about $1,000 per year. And that's funded by a grant, charity grant. Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation gave us some money. We wouldn't have been able to do this not for the cooperation of the arXiv, because we have the website has a thing which interrogates the arXiv and looks an awful lot like a bot. So you need the arXiv to say, look, this isn't a sort of crawler thing that's trying to do damage to the arXiv and pull things off. It is actually a bona fide website, so they've had to kind of help us out. So I'm not sure whether that's a question or just somebody's left their mic open. I don't know. I'll carry on. We also have some help from NASA ADS, because we're listed in ADS, and they've gave us some advice on how to do things like XML feeds and how to get the metadata quickly onto the ADS system, which we do. And then Arfon and Chris Linton have messaged. This project would not have happened had it not been for these two who've played a big part in it. I mentioned JOSS before, so I won't say any more about that here. So how does this work? Well, everyone here knows about the arXiv, so I probably don't have to say very much, but there are 6 sections in AstroPH, which is astrophysics as far as I'm concerned. Those are the 6 sections. I won't read them out. The remit of the Open Journal of Astrophysics is that basically we'll consider publishing anything that fits in any of these sections. Of course, things can be in one or more section if they fit, or they could be cross-listed into it. So we have some papers in general relativity, for example, which are cross-listed in this cosmology and non-galactic astrophysics, for example. Probably because of my background and because of the edits, who we've been able to talk to about this journal, we have more papers in cosmology and non-galactic astrophysics, and instrumentation and methods for astrophysics, because that includes statistical things. So we have more in those, but we do have publications in all of these categories. We haven't published a huge number of papers so far, but it's about 40 as of today. So we do cover these bases. We haven't really penetrated the Earth and planetary astrophysics community as much as I'd like, but who knows, we'll grow as time goes on. So what do we do? Oh, I've lost a bullet point there, but not worry about that. So the main thing the Open Journal does is peer review. So what happens is our preferred method of publication is that an author puts a journal, a paper onto the arXiv. So that's ahead of publication. I know some people don't like to do that, and so there is an alternative, but we need to be sure that the paper is actually going to go onto the arXiv, because we can't publish, we don't actually publish a separate version. It's the arXiv version that we review. So, and then we assign it to an editor. We have an editorial board, which includes some distinguished scientists and myself. And we usually have 2 referees. If an editor feels that they know enough about the paper that they can do it themselves, then we'll have 1 referee probably. But mostly it's 2. So it's the usual cycle of going around reviewers, revise and resubmit, and then correct and so on. Then when it's ready, the authors have to put the accepted version on the arXiv, which would normally be a different version from the one that was submitted. We then, what I do is create an overlay on our website, which is basically a front page. I'll show you in a moment, which is basically the abstract of the paper, some metadata, and a link to the arXiv version of the paper. The author then puts, and we issue what's called a DOI, which is a digital object identifier. It's a persistent identifier, a unique identifier for a paper. We do that through the Open Journal. So we have a similar structure as for JOS for doing this. And then we register the metadata with Crossref. So all of the search engines, the things that resolve citations, will pick that up. It goes much more quickly if you put the DOI in the field on the arXiv that asks for a DOI, because then ADS, NASA ADS, which is one of the principal ways of picking up citations, actually gets it from there very, very quickly. Crossref does work eventually, even if you don't do that, because it has these, it basically crawls citations, and anyone who cites it will find where the DOI is and so on. But it's quicker if you just put it on NASA ADS, because most of the papers that cite one of our papers is actually also on ADS. So that bit actually takes, I published a paper this morning, actually, just before I did a orientation talk for our new students. And this business about creating the overlay and doing the DOI and getting all the metadata ready for a paper actually takes about 20 minutes. So it's not a huge, commercial publishers will let you believe that this is some enormously complicated task that takes hours and hours, and it actually doesn't. Now, over the course of the project, the capacity of our journal has increased a bit. There are still some bits I haven't automated yet, which I haven't had time to write the scripts to do them. But we can now actually have supplementary data for astrophysics that might be catalogs or software. So we can actually now host them at the overlay. Actually, for software, most people don't really like to do that. They rather have it on GitHub. So actually a lot of open source software. So we can include a link to GitHub there. And we also, well, NASA ADS is quite an interesting, so again, that's a gloriously useful system. That actually usually updates on a batch process that most of the time happens at weekends. It does update sporadically on other time. So what I do usually on a Sunday morning is go and check the updates and make sure that our papers are correctly indexed on that. Inspire, again, that is something that we have to I keep an eye on, but we could automate that. I know some of the cosmology papers, it's a particle physics thing inside high energy physics thing, but a lot of cosmology papers get indexed on there as well. So this bit is actually essentially the only thing that we reckon that you need. Once you've got the DOI, that's a unique identifier. And instead of volume number, page number, and so on, you just have the DOI, and that all the other metadata, authors, institutions, all that kind of stuff is pinned to that, and everything gets picked up automatically. So you just need this, really. So DOIs, I can't remember when they actually started, but they're really useful because it's basically each paper is a unique thing. Incidentally, it's not on the slide, but we do encourage our authors to use an ORCID ID as well. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it. It's ORCID, not like the flower with no H in the middle. And the ORCID ID basically is a unique identifier for an author. So if you put your ORCID ID in along with your submission of a paper, then everything will be automatically assigned to you. And the reason why that's useful is that some people have different versions of their names. So you might be P. Coles, as I am in some publications, or Peter Coles, or you might have your middle initial missing, or you might have got married, so your name has changed, or you might have transitioned, in which case your name might have changed as well. And then all of that will be taken care of through the ORCID ID. Your ORCID ID is basically a unique identifier. So this is a great thing to use. Okay, so what's different about the Open Journal? Now, actually, I put this online only. In fact, quite a lot of journals are online only now. We don't charge it, but the difference is there's no fee, either author or reader. The author keeps copyright to the work, so we don't mind if you use the work again. Again, copyright varies from journal to journal. When I started, basically you gave up the copyright, but that's been relaxed a bit now. So, but it's very simple with us. You have the copyright to your work and you can reuse it if you want without asking us. From acceptance to publication usually takes a few hours. The delay here is usually just depositing the metadata with Crossref, because the metadata is actually, again, it's updated on a batch process, so you have to wait for it to. We also secretly keep a copy of the paper in a private repository in case arXiv blows up and disappears, which would be a catastrophe for many reasons, but we do actually have copies of the paper in case arXiv disappears. We also have a Twitter account and a Facebook page, and we promote the papers on those. So that's what we do, and there's no charge. So the publication is, we do get quite a lot of discussion on Twitter, especially for these papers. The kind of people who use the Open Journal seem to be, generally speaking, there are exceptions, people who are quite keen on using social media. So we do get links. Twitter is actually great for sharing a URL and adding a commenter. Here's a new paper, and we just give the URL. So we tend to get a lot of that. Right. So just keep going here. We are actually a member of two things. Plan S, which I mentioned earlier, requires authorized journals to be listed in the directory of open access journals, which we are, the Open Journal of Astrophysics. And we're also a member of a large network called the Free Journal Network. So it's basically journals which are like us, Diamond, open access. You want some statistics? Now, actually, I should. Oops. As of this morning, we've published 39 papers. That's not a huge number. I mean, you probably get, probably that's for one of the big journals, that might be a couple of months worth or even less the papers, but we're new, so take up has been growing steadily. What's worth mentioning, though, I think, is that of those 39 papers have accumulated 896 citations, which is an average of 23 per paper. It's considerably higher than you get in a traditional journal. We have 2 reviewers usually, and we do reject a significant number of papers. The acceptance rate is first submission anyway is 40%. But roughly speaking, I haven't actually done a recent calculation of that. And it's worth saying that most of the ones that reject are not that we reject are not submitted through arXiv. They're people who submit directly, and most of those would clearly not be accepted by arXiv because they're sort of some random person just submits something and we can't. It's clearly not of sufficient quality. So many of those are desk rejected without reviewers, but we do reject some at review stage as well. For those of you who like these things, we don't have an impact factor, a journal impact factor. I really hate the journal impact factor. It's a really bogus statistical thing, but people talk about it a lot of the time. The impact factor is based on the average number of citations per year. So the impact factor for year N uses the citations for articles published in, it's the citations received in year N for articles published in years N-1 and N-2, and the impact factor for year N is published in year N+1. So we haven't been going long enough to actually satisfy, to enable us to run that algorithm. So just a few other things where I do need to automate a few more things. It's just a few of us working on this, so it's gone a long way despite small number of people working on it. I should say Scholastica help a lot with these things themselves, so they do a lot of things behind the scenes. Because we're new, we're not yet listed in the Science Citation Index and Web of Science, but we've applied for that, and I don't see why we shouldn't be listed. As we get increasing numbers, we'll be able to automate more, and the first journal impact factor will be next year. So it'll be for this year based on the last 2 years, and will be published next year. Right, so here's I thought I'd give you an example, because I'm going to show you the web page, and I'm not sure it'll work through this. But I'm going to, so this is the not the latest one, but the one before the latest one. So there's a guy here. This is an overlay for a very long paper, actually. It's 60 pages, which is the Cambridge pipeline for Planck high frequency instrument data. And it's a guy you might have heard of, George Eustathiou, has actually published that here. And you'll see basically what you get is an overlay with some metadata on. This is the section of arXiv which it's in. It's a section on our journal as well. The volume, the date of publication, which was last month, and the DOI. This is really the only thing that you need, and some keywords, and the CC BY license, which is how we publish the data. And then there's the abstract, and then if you want to get the paper, you go to the arXiv. And you can click on that link, but you can't because this is just a screen grab. So I'm actually going to try to show you it in a moment. Now I'm coming to almost to the end of the presentation now. So I'm going to ask anyone who's interested, please consider submitting your papers. We're very pleased this year. We've published our first Euclid paper, and we've had papers from LSST consortium and various other big collaborations. And that's a good sign for us. It's catching on, but it's mainly in cosmology that we're getting submissions, as I said before. The rate limiting step in the process is the only important process, actually, which is the refereeing. And so my main plea here is that if you get a request from us to review something for Open Journal of Astrophysics, we're not a predatory journal, we're not playing games. If we were a predatory journal, we must be the worst one ever, because we don't make any money out of it at all. We don't charge anyone, so it can't be predatory. It's incompetent if it's meant to be predatory. But please don't just ignore this. Of course, everyone's entitled to decline a refereeing request. It might be too busy. That's perfectly fine. We understand the situation. We're all in the same business, so it can be difficult to find the time to review papers, but don't just ignore them, just say no. That's what, if you do get a request. And finally, we can't exist without the arXiv. And the arXiv is basically run on a shoestring. Its budget is a few $1 million. It's getting better. They're working hard to get some more revenue. But if we ever get to the point where we had to charge, if we were publishing 100 papers per month instead of 15 per year, we might have to charge and take on some extra staff. And we would charge tens of dollars, and I would make sure that a big slice of that would go to the arXiv. I do feel a little bit guilty that we're sitting on top of the arXiv and not actually paying them for doing that. If I was I can do another little bit of a side rant here, which is that if I were a billionaire philanthropist and I wanted to support science, I wouldn't institute a medal or a prize or something like that. I'd give the money to the arXiv, because that's, in practical terms, does more to advance scientific communication and publication than these prizes. Not that I have anything against people winning prizes, that's fine. But right, so submissions are open, and that's what it looks like. You can click on that. Now, what I'm planning to do is I think what I'll do is I'll stop sharing this one and have a look at the chat to see if there are any questions that I can answer. There's a chat facility down there.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks. If you consider you have concluded, we can open. This is the way we proceed, because that work very well here. So if, so if you consider you concluded, which is your, if you want to continue, you are of course most welcome.
Well, let me just quickly.
Just let me. If you have more material to present or some statement to communicate, you are most welcome. If
I just wanted to show you the website. Hopefully, okay, I'm sharing the screen now.
That's very well.
So you can see, this is the Open Journal of Astrophysics website, just to show you that it exists. Here are the papers we have published. I'll just click on this one and see. This is a thing about halos and so on. That's what I showed you a snapshot of it before. Assuming you can see this, I never know whether you can see things on that. And if I just click on this, you can see that it'll take you to the arXiv. I'll go to the bottom one. That's the arXiv version. And you'll see it's version accepted by the Open Journal of Astrophysics, and the DOI is down here. So all of the journals, all of the papers basically look like that. They have an overlay, which is just a page with metadata on it. It's all searchable. And then you can click on the thing and it takes you to the arXiv, and that's the version. And you'll notice mostly it's version 2. This is version 2, which is the accepted version. Okay, so that's all I wanted to do. I wasn't sure that that would work through Zoom, but it does work, so yeah, that's fine.
So thanks a lot for this very interesting presentation. I should say that most, people here in France, including myself, we didn't know. I knew when and invited you, of course. That is why I invited to give this presentation. But many colleagues didn't know or have not enough knowledge of the Open Journal of Astrophysics, and that is very good. You have this opportunity to present. Now we open the discussion, so which can be comments, points, remarks, reactions, or questions. And please, those of you who would like to address the points, stand up your hand, and then we will proceed by order. So I see here first George Smoot, and then after Nick Kaiser. Thanks. Welcome to both of you. So please, George, ask your question or address your point.
Okay, so thank you for your talk, Peter. I was in here because a COVID has created a time warp for me. In 10 days, I'm giving a talk and being on a panel in Beijing on open science, but I recorded the talk last week. So it's, but I wanted to see if I got it right or not. And I took a very different view, and it's very interesting how orthogonal our discussions and so forth is, and how in some sense astrophysics looks to be very pure, in the sense that the open science issues that are already dogging a lot of other things, including the research on the pandemic, where the data are being fudged or faulty or whatever, you know, where open science means more than just open publications. It means open data, it means open referee, it means, you know, there's 6 elements to the whole thing in order for you to have some trust in the end product. And even then you have to be careful what's going on. However, the one place where you said you had a weakness, which was the planetary and you know, sciences guy, that's a place where I'm actually holding back a thing, which is a list of asteroids that private companies could, well, mine isn't exactly the right word, but exploit and make in the billions to trillions of dollars in the next 10-year timescale. So that's a very valuable piece of data that if you were one of the 3 companies that can put satellites, private companies put satellites up now, you would go and make a claim on those asteroids right now, and then there'd be an argument. And so the purity even of astrophysics is going to be threatened, but in most other fields, the purity is greatly threatened. And this looks back to the question, the whole question of open science and so forth. So when I look back at it, before 1700, there was the opposite of open science. Everybody was holding back. And we have the famous Newton-Leibniz situation where both claimed to have published their results much earlier than they made the final results public. And they were going to try and make money out of it or get money from their funders, right? So there is the thing that you didn't address is the tension between open science and immediate reward, either people's prestige for getting a job or acknowledgement, or their benefactor or the country getting some power out of it. So there is a lot of tension in the whole prospect of open. But one of the things that I saw when I was doing the research for this, and Nick Kaiser's guy, we talked about it at lunch a couple of weeks ago. So when I was still forming the talk, and that is open science, if it's done right, leads to a much more rapid and much more honest development of science, which is extraordinarily important for the scientists, but even more important to society because the economic growth. So it comes down to money every time. It comes down to money. The not stuff, the first 2 journals, and Ken Gagnon had asked what was the first journal, and it was a French journal, but then it went out of business right away. And about a month later, the Royal Society, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, became the second journal, and then it stays in business. And there's a new French journal that's replaced the first one. There's a long history here, and there's tensions, but the tensions are going to be extremely intense now that everyone understands that having a free exchange of information develops the whole economy very well, but a company that holds back information can get very rich off of that information. So there is tremendous amount of stuff, and there have been many, many cases in many fields like medicine where people have stopped studies if we're starting to get the wrong answer. There's just now a whole set of things, and we're reaching a transition point where science is less funded by the public and more funded by private companies. And so many things are going to just break loose.
Yeah, okay. If I can just answer that, there's a couple of points to make. I mean, absolutely, I do. I'm not sure how orthogonal we are there, but I actually agree with quite a lot of what you say. I think if a private company funds a piece of scientific research, then that's a different situation from if the taxpayer funds it. And of course, where everything that I'm talking about is influenced by astrophysics, where we've essentially been open access dominated for many years, ever since we've had the arXiv. So now I'll just give you a couple. If you look at the arXiv, it's quite interesting the number of disciplines that don't use it. So the Royal Astronomical Society actually covers astronomy and geophysics, and that includes solid Earth geophysics. And they basically don't do open access, because there's lots in solid Earth geophysics that's about mining, commercially exploitable things to do with the Earth. There's research about fracking and all kinds of stuff there, and none of that is on the arXiv. And I have a feeling that the Earth and planetary sciences community, there's quite a lot. That's the reason why we don't get so many of those as interested. Now, many years ago, about a decade ago, I saw a paper that actually threw a newspaper report that was about brain interpreting brain asymmetry from magnetic resonance measurements. And I saw it and I thought, actually, I'm not sure that I believe the statistics here. So being an astronomer, I did what you would do with an astronomer. I wrote a very polite email saying, I'd quite like to have a look at this data, if you don't mind, and see if I can do something else. And normally, if you do that with another astrophysicist or astronomer, they'll say, fine, and if it's interesting, can I be a co-author? They'll do that. They share their data quite willingly, mostly, not always, but mostly. I got this an incredibly rude email back saying, how dare you suggest I've worked on this data, no, it's my data and I'm not sharing it. And it just struck me, I didn't pursue it any further, but it struck me, what a huge difference there is in attitudes towards this. I suppose it's because the astronomical data is kind of out there and you're just kind of, it's not really your universe, it's just your measurements of it, and somebody else could do it. But I believe in reproducibility. I think you should make the data available so somebody else can do the check with it. Yeah. But I think the commercially exploitable research or commercially funded research, to me, is in a different category from blue skies research like we do. Nevertheless, and I also take your point about the reward, the prestige to do with the scientific result. But if you publish in open access, you don't lose that. You still get citations. In fact, you probably get more citations. You probably get more benefit from it. And I actually don't think that's so much a problem. There is a problem. So I've run various polls on my blog, one of which was open access. Open access publication, do you think it's a good idea? The totally representative and scientifically controlled poll on a blog, that's sarcastic, by the way. Basically, the overwhelming majority of people like open access publishing in astrophysics. That's clear. Open data, sharing astronomical data, is done widely anyway. Overwhelming majority do that. When I suggested a poll about sharing software, the results were the other way around. Actually, a majority were not in favor. And I think the reason for that is that somebody might have spent years and years and years developing a very complicated numerical n-body code, for example, and then be worried that if they just make it open source, somebody could rip it off and they'll never get any credit for it. The counter argument, and so I understand that, the counter argument is Volker Springer, right? Who actually did such a thing, and he's made his code publicly available, and he's actually not harmed his career in any way, I think, doing that. So
let us, thanks, Peter. Perhaps we come again to all these points. Let us take the different points from the audience, and then you can take again, yeah. And George, of course, can reply and so. So please, Nick, is your time now.
Thank you for a very nice talk, Peter. It's very interesting. So I was wondering about something related to this, the background being that if I look at old papers of from monthly notices from 100 years ago, they were presented at the monthly meetings at Burlington House.
Yeah, read by such and such a. Yeah.
And what you find is, so at the end of the presentation, there would be discussion. And at least the distinguished members in the audience, their comments would end up in the journal. And I've often found those very interesting and insightful. And that went away with the, when everything became, the process for monthly notices changed. I was wondering if you thought about adding extra features like that, or indeed making public the referee's comments.
Yes, we actually preempted something that I didn't mention during the talk. But that's absolutely yes. In fact, the first incarnation of the Open Journal actually envisaged that referees' reports would be published, and I actually think there's a lot to be said for that. Not all potential referees are keen on that. We are, I think, quite strict on what we accept from referees. So, as you're probably aware, some referees don't. They use language which is inappropriate, and I think and can be quite rude and personally rude. That's a minority, but it does happen. So I think
they wouldn't be so rude if they
exactly
knew.
yeah if you knew it was going to be published, you'd probably be much more careful about what you said. I like the idea of publishing the review reports, and I know that there are some journals that are thinking about doing that, and I would like to do that if we're on the basic low budget platform at the moment, which doesn't have many bells and whistles on it, but there's no reason why we couldn't do that, subject to agreement. Now the other question was about comments, and again that was something that we envisaged on the first version of this. It's not on the Scholastica platform now. But my first sort of imagining of what this would look like would be something like Reddit, where you'd have this is the reviewed paper and the archive link, and then you'd have comments underneath, and the audience, anyone could comment. Of course, the downside of it is if you've ever looked at Reddit, you'll see what a horrible load of comments you get after things. It's like YouTube. You watch something on YouTube, but don't look at the comments because it's the dregs of humanity commenting on. So the problem we had there with comments is how you police whether people behave appropriately and who's allowed to comment. I think that's a difficult issue because you want the comments to be, you don't want to censor people who have perfectly good things to say. But on the other hand, the fact of the internet is that there are people who will behave extremely badly on the internet. And so, the archive has some gatekeeping as well. So not all papers go on the archive. And so you have to. So when you were talking, Nick, it struck me that, when all those old issues, I remember recently reading Lemaitre's paper that was communicated in English through monthly notices, and it's communicated by or read by Eddington or whatever the phrase was. In a sense, that kind of thing happens with the archive in the sense that if you're going to submit to the archive, you have to have some kind of approval in order to submit. So you have to, you can't be just somebody, a private individual. You have to find someone who'll sponsor you to be able to produce, or you have to have an institutional email address to do that. We have a facility, which we haven't used very much actually, to, and it's something that I would like to do, which is to have authors write a more popular sort of editorial summary of their paper, not an editorial summary, but a sort of, kind of almost like a little press release or something, explaining in simple terms why this is an interesting result. That's another thing that we thought about putting on. All of these things would require a little bit of expansion of the platform that we've got, but nothing is very complicated there. It's just a question of, it'd be interesting to find out how many potential referees would be put off accepting the job of refereeing if they knew their referee report was going to be published. But I think
So it seems to me that there's interesting feedback information that one can find on places like Benty Fields.
Yeah.
Right, where you can see who's reading the papers, you can see some discussions, but it's quite limited.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, the world has changed so much since people like McVitie and McRae were making witty comments.
Yes, yes.
That are worth reading. I mean, I mean, two things. I mean, obviously, like you say, there's this sort of, it could just be noise, just too much noise. And the other one is looking at Benty Fields, at least, there isn't all that much discussion. I don't know why it isn't, you know, their facility isn't used more.
But there's a thing called, what's it called? Cosmo Coffee, where they do this. Sean Fitzpatrick has done this site where they basically post a paper and there's a discussion underneath. The trouble is that if you're actually really interested in this, it's hard enough to keep up with the papers on arXiv anyway, and you know, you can't. And actually being able to comment, to find the time to add reasonable comments on that is a difficult one. The problem is that you know, in the closed world of the Royal Astronomical Society of the 1930s, there would be a few gentlemen in the audience, and they would all you know each other, and they'd be able to make comments, and that would be all very polite and so on. Now with the internet, we have the whole world potentially able to comment, and not all of them are likely to comment in the same kind of interesting or useful way, or even witty way.
Indeed.
Okay, we will come. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Peter. So we have Karel Sieles and then Philippe Helvig after. Karel, please. Karel Sieles.
Hi, thank you so much, Peter, for this presentation. I think it's a really great new way for opening science. It's a really great tool. I'm really excited about it. Maybe one of the many steps we need towards decolonizing science and having a better way of collaborating to understand the universe. So thank you for that. I was wondering regarding what Nick just said, that if those adding features, we could have it as kind of like, you know, GitHub like push, so that if we see something is missing, for example, you mentioned that you are using the 6 categories of arXiv, and there are more and more talks about having cross sciences, meanings, for example, astrophysics and anthropology or sociology, and you know, this is not part of those categories. So would there be kind of like this openness to have different, you know, new features? And I have a second question regarding the reviewer and how, if there is a conflict of interest, you would handle that. Thank you.
Yeah, so they're good. I mean, one of the things that I've encouraged, you see that the overlay is a relatively light structure. It's not a complicated thing. As you see, it's basically just a single web page. And there's no reason why one couldn't have a whole plethora of these journals that cover different subjects. We have set out to be an arXiv overlay journal for astrophysics, because basically in my experience, that's where I see most of the scientific research. It's not the only model that's possible. And as I said before, you could easily make a platform like this sit on top of other repositories of open access material in sociology, social sciences. They don't use the arXiv. We've now got a bio version of the arXiv, for example, which didn't exist when I started out in the field. So there's all kinds of things that you could do like this. I think the humanities generally have a different kind of attitude to the publication and dissemination of results. It's a different world in a way. I mean, their papers look differently, their people read them in a different way, they use them in a different way. So I think you have to have a sort of, you have to know your community in order to make the right kind of open access for that community. astrophysics is easier because we've got a culture of doing this. Our papers tend to be of a particular kind. The results are communicated rapidly, and we're used to article level citation numbers, and in astrophysics citation numbers are very large. In pure mathematics, for example, where there's another arXiv overlay journal run by Tim Gowers, citations in pure mathematics are very low. So that doesn't mean that nobody's reading them. It just means that the kind of culture of how you use articles and citations is different, and you have to respect that. So astrophysics is a niche, but it's a niche which offers immediately a model for how we can do open access. And it was my idea. If we can't make it work in astrophysics, it's going to be really difficult in other fields. Now, your other question was what? Oh, it was about conflict of interest, was it?
Yes.
I think,
Yeah,
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. The conflict of interest is a tricky one, and especially tricky. I've just mentioned that we published a Euclid paper not very long ago, and that's got loads of authors, and actually most potential referees who know about subjects related to that will actually be part of the consortium. So it's actually much more difficult to find referees for the really, 500 or 1,000 author consortia. So when so basically the editor takes well, first of all, the editor, I'm a member of Euclid, so I had to recuse myself from being the editor for that paper. Although I had nothing to do with that paper, I'm officially a member of Euclid, and therefore there's officially a conflict of interest. So I had to find another editor to look after that who was a cosmologist, but not a member of Euclid. And so we did that. And then you have to look through whether there's an institutional conflict or a collaborative conflict. And so the editor can look at that to see if there's an obvious one. But in the first paragraph of the letter of invitation to review a manuscript, it does talk, the reviewer is given instructions to consider possible conflicts of interest. So there's a sort of two-phase thing where, and I've done one recently where there was a very tenuous conflict of interest, but the author felt unhappy that it might be perceived to be a conflict of interest, and so I chose another reviewer. But it's a particular problem. We don't always know if there's been a bit of personal history between an author and somebody that we might choose as a referee, and so on. But we do handle it. It is very, I'm not saying we handle it perfectly, but we do have as part of our workflow, a conflict of interest question that editors and reviewers have to answer. So the reviewer has to say, I don't have a conflict of interest here. I don't believe that I have a conflict of interest.
Yes, that is, I will give now the tour to next. I should say that is the usual now for most recognized set journals. If you are referee, you need to stay, there are a setup of rules, about conflict of interest, language, inclusion, and so on and so on. So it is a general framework set. So
can I just add a little bit to that,
yes.
Which is that I remember my first paper was published in 1986.
Well, but that was at the time, but not now.
But the referee actually signed the report. And I won't say who it was because it's not really relevant, but it was quite a distinguished cosmologist. And because the referee signed a report for that one, I assumed that always happened. And it never occurred to me at all that a referee would want to be anonymous, or that it would somehow be encouraged that a referee should be anonymous. And then I discovered that was the exception rather than the rule. And I have a problem with anonymity. I can understand the reason for it, because if you're relatively junior and you're criticizing the work of a senior scientist, that's difficult. But I actually think that, if you're not anonymous, that will kind of make you behave in a better way, and it'll be more clear whether you really do have a conflict. So the author, for example, might say, "Oh, pick that person," you know.
Well,
there is
yes, that is another point. If it should be anonymous or not. I mean, that is also integrity. If you need to be hidden, if you need to be in face to rise your integrity, and all that also can be discussed.
Yeah.
I mean, but
it's
very good. It's very good that the journals now all journals, when you are invited to review, to make a referee of a paper, you need to read all the statements and to check and say, I have not conflict of interest, I have, etc., etc. Then after, of course, if there are conflicts of interest or not, but the report then also is a reflection, it reflects the objectivity of the referee and its capacity to review that's, happened. Now there are several points I want then after to do, because I think that there are some confusion. So, not with you, Peter, but with some points put together in the question. So, Philippe Elvig, please summarize your point. You already make written points in the discussion. So, if you can summarize or add other points to your comments or questions. Thanks.
Yeah, this is something I didn't mention in the discussion. And one thing which other journals, whether they're print or online or hybrid, do is they actually guarantee to publish the papers they accept. The Open Journal of Astrophysics can't do this because it relies on arXiv. And it seems to me you could just add a link in addition to the arXiv link for a paper which you accept. For the people who use the OJA as it is now, nothing at all would change. You don't have to solve all the problems with arXiv. You just have to offer an alternative. You've said you keep the papers on disk anyway. So we're talking about one line of HTML code, and then you would actually be closer to a traditional journal, which has its own website. And if people don't look at that, that's a different problem. But it seems to me it would be, you could make the journal much more attractive. And I certainly know people for whom that's a reason not to publish with the OJA. If you would just publish the papers independently of arXiv, it would make it much more attractive. And if you really want to be an alternative to the traditional journals, then this is something you need to offer. And I'm just curious why you don't do it.
Yeah, thank you. I agree.
Yeah, well, I think when we're not it seems a strange argument to me that to be an alternative to traditional journals, you should try to be like a traditional journal. My logic was essentially, I tried to explain in the talk, was that basically I get all of my scientific results through arXiv. And actually we don't need journals, we just need the arXiv. We just need to review the arXiv. Now, in practical terms, using our current platform, many Scholastica journals do publish articles as PDF and HTML on the platform. So that's easy to do. We picked the cheapest option, which is an overlay journal to keep our costs down. So we could guarantee that it's free to read and to submit to. If we actually adopted a thing where we actually published like a traditional online journal, as some Scholastica journals do, it would cost us a lot more and we would have to charge. It wouldn't be a huge amount of money, but it would be not free because we haven't got the budget at the moment to do it. So there's a practical reason, which is that it would be too expensive. It would increase our costs quite considerably, but also if I can just go back to your original point that you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to the reason why we encourage authors to put their paper first on the arXiv, because then we know if it's on the arXiv, it's going to be on the arXiv. and we can publish it. So we do have some papers. I've thought about, you know, in principle, we could get a paper that we accept through the non-archive submission route, and then we find that the author can't put it on the archive.
Yeah, what would happen?
That has not happened yet, so I don't know. I think what would happen would be that we would have a discussion with the archive to see whether we can change their mind if it's been reviewed. I think another question that we've had is that if it's on the archive but not in AstroPH, it's another question. So again, we had a paper that was actually submitted recently, which was in the GRQC bit of archive alone. And our publishing criteria are quite clear that it has to be in the AstroPH section of the archive. So in that case, I wrote to the author and said, could you at least cross-list it instead of just having it on GRQC? And that's what happened. And so that wasn't an issue in that case. So cross-listed is fine. But we have published our editorial standards, and I think the editorial criteria. And I think once we've published those, we are obliged, until we officially announce a change of those, to stick to them. You know, so the remit of the journal is the 6 categories which are on AstroPH, and if something doesn't fit in those, we can't publish it. That's basically where we are, unless we can if something appears in another section of archive. I mean, I've had there was a question in the chat that I was reading earlier. One of the papers which I did a desk reject in was about nanotechnology. And I didn't send that out to referee. I just said it's not for the Open Journal of Astrophysics. It's making no comment about it. We can't publish it. So that's the kind of thing we desk reject, things like that. So that's, I think, a reasonable one. The more difficult one is where there's something that's kind of vaguely like cosmology or something, but is not in the AstroPH section of the archive.
I think, excuse me, I think it's clear. I mean, your point, Philippe, you address it. I mean, and I think it's more or less clear the answer, Peter. I mean, and the philosophies, I could say, or the line of all the Open Journal of Astrophysics. I want to now, because I mean, I want to in some way to take all what Peter said, I mean, and all the discussion, and to open a little bit to more general points, because I think there are some confusion here, and we are here to address this important subject, which is at the heart, I mean, of transformations in science, and I mean, and the communication of science, I mean, what has been said here. First, I agree with all what I have said. The questions have been made. And now, one important point here is free of charge, open access, and free access. That means free of charge for authors and free of charge for readers, which is not the majority of what is called open access journals, in which authors need to pay, and even good quality journals, I mean, which are evolving very, very well, but the author need to pay, and I don't agree for that. Or the other part in which you need this open access, but I mean, or the subscription, I mean, you on the institution need to pay to have the access for reading. I think open science is free of charge for authors and free of charge for readers, and keeping the highest quality and the interest of, I think we all agree with that, I mean, in general. Now, this requires some strategies or planning, as you, Peter, you did, you started Open Journal of Astrophysics, very good, and others open journals, open access are going on or evolving to some disciplines in which became free access for readers and free access for authors. And for instance, myself, I am academic editor, not for any paper. For the papers I am interested, the lines of research I am interested to develop and to, because are my ideas and all the research. So I have started with 2 special issues because I never paid. I am from public or national institutions, open science from the beginning, always, and open science for public, open science for colleagues, etc., etc. I never pay for publishing. And I should say that even what you said about the books, because this is not for journal, but also for books, all these kind of books in which you are, which were very useful at the time where not all this open internet. And I never paid for that. I never paid for that. And that was very, very useful. It was a very good collaboration. Now, what I want to say is that I joined several of the points here in which is not good, and also for the evolution and my experience, what I see, is to be attached to some other platform for a journal and here arXiv. I don't think it's good to be attached to arXiv, to make that a set clause or requirement to be in arXiv, or if it's not in arXiv, then you don't take, and so on. You know, arXiv have evolved from the beginning, was in the beginning of the 90s, till now. And it also is not too good to have, in some sense, monopole of one thing, arXiv. And as you said, arXiv have not referees, but have moderators, and have also donators, have institutions who made the job, and also made their own, etc., etc., etc. And it's a very good thing that works. And there are also papers. I always publish it in arXiv from the very beginning, but there are a list of cases of very good papers and prestigious people who have not been accepted in arXiv, and make things also discussion that was debated, in committees and so on. So arXiv is very good, but it's not good for a journal to make its life attached to arXiv, also because the evolution, also because astrophysics, and in particular cosmology, is becoming a big community. It was, it's important that they have its journal open, as you do, open journals, and free of charge for everybody, but not relied in one, because in one arXiv, whatever be that the arXiv you refers or other. So there are also other lists which are not crepot, which are lists, which appears and so on, which is good. That's make some disciplines to be more visible and so on. Of course, arXiv remain, but it's not the only. There is ResearchGate, which give you a DOR, which give you a network, and people contact and discuss and make and so on. Of course, diversity is very interesting and very important, we all know. And so I think that the weak point, which I understand, I mean the weak, or said the observation, which I understand your view, that allows you to make the link and so, but you make the link also with other journal, with other repository which are good, or seed or whatever. And so I think that if you rely attached to arXiv, because arXiv is not referring, but have moderators and so on. So this that a journal is not a list of preprints or of reprints, just that a journal need referring and so on, and have communities, have ideas or a school of thinking too, which appears, I mean, evolving. And in particular, and with that I will finish, so to that, the point is also, for instance, European Union, or if you want, European Commission, which is financing, instead of supporting the projects and so on, and which makes a requirement that authors who receive need to make open science and journal disseminations and so on. But it's a restricted view of open science because it means to publish in any journal, and also they gave money to publish, I mean, to pay your cost as author in those journals which require you to pay. So you have more money to publish, and I mean, you have in a better position to go to different journals, if this journal not, and the other, and so on. So the point here is to go, to advance, to make the progress, and you did in the point, really open, free of charge for readers and for authors, and excellent science. And for that, there are starting Open Journal of Astrophysics, but it's not the case, and even in the philosophy, because there are agencies which continue to financing for publication, and the big projects and big instruments have already, when they got the money, or they have already in the contract with the journal in which they will publish. So you see, but it's an evolution. I think that we go to this open society, open communication, but the referees must be reviewing is absolutely necessary, and is not only one list, whatever it will be good, that we need to rely. All open journals might be attached to that. I don't think so. One of these is good, but and finally, I should say that astronomy or astrophysics is by far not, I mean, historically, if we take from the 80s, or 70s or 90s, is not the most avant-garde. I don't know if I don't know in English. I mean, the avant-garde, in the open dissemination. I should say that because if you see for astronomy, because I needed to observe also the difference to my colleague, the difference at the time between astronomy and astrophysics, and sometimes I need to make the difference between models and theory, as you know, and etc. And so astronomy have the tradition to do not do preprints. Preprints were, in my generation, said, I don't know, were a good and a strong tradition in physics and high energy physics. What inspired, for instance, is doing and so on, and make the slack. I mean, when they were the list or repository in the papers, version papers, not version of line of reprints. And astronomy was not accepted, made in general, I don't need, at least I can say, was not accepted to make a preprints. And then after, when accepted, came the archives, and take time. I remember very well, take time, because the argument was not because in astronomy we prefer to have the referee reports, and there are many rounds and so on. So you see, now evolved, and also because the requirements of time, etc., etc. So take this. I think it's interesting to take all these points in the discussions, because the question start. I mean, I think that we go towards open access. The question is how it will be possible to really make a reality for many journals, open access for readers, and free of charge for readers, and free of charge for authors. And I don't think that the question must be attached to archive, or to only one archive. You take archive, but you don't need to take, to be attached to archive. You need to open.
Can I just respond to that question?
Yes.
So I think, my view of that is, first of all, the Open Journal of Astrophysics is not going to replace every possible mode of publication in astrophysics. It's an idea. I hope that it finds a place in the landscape of scientific communication in astrophysics, and I think it will, because it has many positive features. The point is, I firmly believe that scientific results should be freely available to whoever wants to read them, and it should be free at the point of submission as well. So we agree 100% at that point. The route we've taken with the Open Journal is, but if it's free to the authors and it's free to the reader, there is still a cost. That none of this is free, okay? Somebody somewhere has to pay. Now, the question is, how do you do it? The way we've done it at the Open Journal of Astrophysics is to reduce the cost to the absolute minimum that we can afford, and we just pay it ourselves out of a small budget, okay? So the archive is free, our overlay thing is minimal, and therefore our costs are very low, so we can make it free. Now, I'm not saying that at all that a more wealthy institution or a bigger organization, in fact, one of the learned societies should be doing this, which is actually putting some resources in, perhaps doing an open access journal, which is not tied to the archive. We're doing that primarily because the archive has most of the papers that we're likely to be interested in, but also it allows us to do it very cheap by overlaying. If you had a bit of resource from a larger organization, you could publish set up your own journal. I think what's going to happen in the future is that we're going to have a rich environment of different kinds of publishing, and it doesn't really matter as much. We're not just going to have Astrophysical Journal and monthly notices and AAS. There'll be because it's individual articles that matter, not the wrapper that you put them in. I think that's what we want to do. We are now already seeing in astrophysics that basically article level data is much more interesting than journal level data. I'm interested in citations to original paper, how many downloads you've got for individual papers. So what we're trying to do is to do a sort of the lowest budget possible way of pushing for open access, but at the same time demonstrate that it's possible for other people to become publishers in the same way and use different models. This is not the only model that could possibly work. It does have its limitations, but its limitations are there for a good reason, I believe, which is really to keep down cost while maintaining the vast majority of the papers that we would like to be able to publish. Scholastica, as I've mentioned, does have the possibility to publish standalone papers. It does have the possibility to sit on top of other repositories if you want to do that. And I don't see any real barrier to somebody else coming along and setting up a journal like that. I mean, I do this, I got interested in it. I've set it up this way because I have a limited budget and I have a limited amount of time. I'm also a head of department and I've got a lot of other things to do. I want to encourage as many people as possible, not only in astrophysics, but in every branch of science, to think about the issues raised by the enormous cost of open access through the gold route and think of better ways of doing it. And if somebody has the time and the resources to do that, I'm 100% in favor of them doing so.
Yes, precisely. I mean, we go to a crucial point too. I mean, all the others were crucial, but we are advancing. I think we are making progresses. And I think that, I mean, because all countries have national institution of research, I mean, what is called public, I mean, different name, but national institution of research, universities, and all ministries of research or secretariats of research, etc., which even at the European level. So, and on all those have have signing all kinds of agreement, encouragement, requisite, prerequisite for open science and open access. I mean, in France also opened arXiv, which is very good, and then require that if you don't make your work repository in the French archive, which is open also for others, then you don't get whatever. I mean, if you are public, your position is from public education or public research, so it's make a requirement for evaluation and so on. Good. I mean, that is not a heavy requirement. It's good. I mean, now, how to pay what you said and to make more independent, real independent journals. I mean, with all what we completely agree, Peter. And then the governments or the tutors, I mean, it could be European Union, it could be your national tutor, I mean, not only Ireland, I mean, or Ireland, I mean, it could be in France, etc. Instead, and European Union, instead to go to pay and make the subscription for to subscribe, I mean, to pay for the journals who are still requirement payment for allow access and so on, they distribute to the institutions or themselves encourage a plan this way to promote the science which is done in their societies. And this is the way, I mean, this is the way. And that you who pioneering did deserve from European Union. Instead, European Union said European Union, I mean, in the other, and also European Union have different channels, or not from the Commission, but just at the European level, or not. I mean, this is not. And then support you or your colleagues, if you are tired, I mean, or your project in this open journal, to allow to give more people to do the platform, I mean, all that you are attaching, and because you said you try to minimize the cost, then you are depending from archives and so on. Because archives, which is very good, but they have their own, which in many ways share all these, but the moderator of archives are anonymous. And many people, I mean, there are, if you take the statistics, I know, I am, and not because myself, but these cases were treated, I mean, and people who have submitted, there was a period, I think now is correcting because of that precisely, in which people they were submitting and they were rejected from perhaps, I mean, and they were disciplines. They were disciplines in which a statistic came, in which were rejecting, perhaps because of competition, perhaps conflict of interest, perhaps because the particular moderators at that time, perhaps I don't know. I mean, or I cannot say it here publicly, said, even if I would like. So this become correcting, evolving. Also, you know that all open science now also is, in some sense, have the declaration or inclusion, diversity, whatever it could be, and including different lines of thinking. I mean, there are research areas in which you don't have, and unfortunately, and in particular in our disciplines, is not closed, the research. I mean, there are no closed, even if it's an open, I mean, there are always problems to be solved. The question is if they are so transcendental, so and whatever. So this requires also people who understand all the differences, and sometimes also because of the urgency, because you need to give in the archives, or in other you give an acceptation or not, rather fast. And well, this happened, and I think is for safety. I mean, for safety and all the integrity, all the framework, transparency. All these are values which are attached to open science and open access and free of charge and referees and so on. So I think it could be very good that you get more support, then you evolve to do not to be so attached. Of course, everybody, you know that everybody who is publishing or in preprint or in reprint and so on, then the interest is to put in archive, and also now in ResearchGate and also in others. I mean, you know how much also even in the internet, they make the internet scholar, and you have your profiles. It's good. And so this is the observation, but in any case, it's open. I mean, and I thank you, and I think that we all recognize, and the reason is why it was a lecture devoted to this. So as you have seen, you got different points and so on. So we need in construction, it's under construction.
Yeah, so one of the main, if I can just summarize it, one of the main purposes of this is to show that it is possible to do things this way. It's not the only way, but I think scientists have a responsibility to think about the future of scientific publishing and how it should work. And if they have better ideas than this, or different ideas that could do things in a different way, then they should follow those, and I would support them. I'm not making any money out of this or anything like that. It's not the reason I'm doing it.
No,
So I would encourage other people to come across those. I should say that other disciplines which use the arXiv quite a lot, I've talked to them about doing something similar to this, but there are models where they're not worked on. And in fact, a lot of people think that, I think what's going to happen in the future is that there'll be much more variegated landscapes. So there'll be publishers, there'll be institutions who essentially publish their own things, they have their own platforms and so on. And as long as the science gets communicated effectively, and things don't physically have to be in the same place, as long as everything's indexed properly, it'll all work very well. So it doesn't have to be one journal for this and one journal for that. They can all communicate with each other. So the more people get interested in pushing this agenda forward, the better it is for all of us. And the Open Journal is a kind of prototype in a way of the journal. It's a serious journal.
Yes.
We have good papers in it, but it's not. It doesn't achieve the goal in itself.
The really advance and progress you made is in a journal and staying clear and clearly open, free of charge for readers, free of charge for authors, because you have a lot of now. Everybody supports open science, open journal, open access, but this open journal, open access is in which the author pay. And so this is really the point, and you are doing, and I mean, we are discussing here how to go, and it could take time, because not all are prepared. I mean, the agencies are prepared to do this. I mean, perhaps also they prefer that because there are already journals which are established, and so in continents or in countries, and so they prefer to pay to the journals and not to the people. Do you understand? And
Yes,
not to the open. But this
I-
will go in some direction, in the same direction in which all these open have evolved. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. I mean, if you just look at how much the landscape of scientific publishing has changed in the last 10 years, that makes it really difficult to predict how it's going to happen in the next 10 years, because I think it's the old model that we've been, I mean, as you mentioned before, basically, I think George Smoot mentioned that the traditional scientific journal has its origins in the 17th century, essentially, and that's going to disappear, whether we like it or that model will disappear. But how it will be replaced in the next decade or so, we don't know. What we have a responsibility to do is to explore different ways in which we could do that for the benefit of the whole scientific community. And I'm presenting this as a way of doing it, but I want more people to think about the issues that are raised by this and say, well, actually, we could do it like this, and do it like this, and carry on.
I think it's a good point to start. Said, except of this observation. I mean, being so attached also as a requisite to arXiv. I mean, if you don't make in arXiv, you cannot do. I think that part I in my mind is my mind, and shared by others too. It restricts, or it's not the way in which you understand the open science. And if you have more funds, because the problem is the time and the cost, and if you have some help for from people and other people and so on, so you can do more independently of archives, which does not mean that people will not put in the archive and publish it in the open journal, or as a preprint they make and then after publishing. I mean, this is usually. but it
It's a
will
question
be,
of offering people choice, basically. I mean, at the moment we have a choice. Nobody says you have to publish in the Astrophysical Journal or in monthly notices or in
of
physical
course.
review letters. You have a choice, and we're offering choice, and hopefully we'll get more choice as time goes on. And
Yes, and now yes, you are mentioning. I mean, I remember. I mean, it's a very short point, but I think it's important. Precisely, you know, when something is new, you need to do the way, which is doing that the way. I mean, the ROAD appears, and that is in all fields. And now for this kind of journal, in particular yours, there is the point in which, I mean, I heard that, not for your journal, but for other journals too, that for people already established, you know, I mean, who had the position, who publish, whatever, I mean, they choose to publish, I mean, said, do not have urgencies to got a position or to publish something because they are needed for to promotion, something like that. So for young people, it's most difficult to publish in a journal which is new, on which takes this, even if it's a very serious journal, I mean, you know, because of the evaluators of them,
Yeah.
or the people who are in the position to offer the position, to pay the salaries, and all the institutions, which are in general not evolving. The systems are not evolving at the speed in which a scientist and the new scientist and so on is happening. So for the young people, if they publish in a journal which is already known, then they get, because of this, as you need the impact, or I don't know, the impact of the journal and how much is the journal. But of course, if these are old journals or have a long tradition, which are most long and so on, it must, I mean, the new journals cannot have the same impact, cannot same. I mean, it's if you want to discover, you cannot, you know, it's the egg and the chicken, no? But in any case, I think that the open science and whatever, the avant-garde is go ahead with people who take risk, who people take risk in the way in which, I mean, evaluated risk, and to make progress. And I have the conviction that this must be done. I mean, and for young people, it will be, for young people, it will also part of their personality, their creativity, to attach to the values that they need to go in new things. Mm-hmm. And not just take the road already done, and then it's more easy. I mean,
yeah. So I agree. I think it's one of the reasons why there's actually quite a lot of inertia in the system, is that the evaluators are an older generation than the people who are doing science, and so it's difficult for the younger generation to do it. Having said that, I've been very pleased about how many relatively early career researchers have taken that step and published with us. One of the first papers we published, and I mentioned that I wasn't the editor for that paper, I recused myself, was with a PhD student of mine a few years ago. And I actually said, look, I'd really like to publish that in this journal, but you're at the beginning of your career. You have to think about what it would look like on your CV when you're applying for jobs and so on. And she said, oh, I like this new idea, really, and we should do it there. where do I get the LaTeX file for this stuff? You know, and so that's what we did. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should publish in a particular journal.
No.
She has, I won't mention her name because she's I haven't asked permission or anything, but she has papers in Physical Review D and in, you know, other papers and in the Open Journal. That's absolutely fine. That's a question of choice. And but I'm gratified that so many younger people. We also have papers by Joe Silk, George Stathiou, Ned Wright, you know, and it's good for us. And we have also papers by big consortia where everyone has said yes. So we have eRosita, for example, the X-ray mission. We have a paper there.
I saw precisely.
So it's good. It's a vote of confidence in us, I think, when a big consortium says yes, we'll publish in.
I think yes, I saw that. I mean, for eRosita, which is very good consortium and also dynamical set. I mean, we had here. I mean, Ezra Bulbul to.
I have to say that I have to say that for my job as the managing editor, it's really a pain when we have a big consortium because the metadata file is enormously, all the author data and their organized, all that has to be checked. So it's much easier to publish when there's only one author because the kind of paperwork, if you like, is the XML files are much simpler. But, you know, I think it's very good for us to get these big consortia coming in, and I think it's a vote of confidence. And I think when people see Euclid papers or dark energy survey papers and things like that in the journal, they say, "Oh, hey, yeah, this is a serious, you know, there's serious stuff there." What I think what will make a big difference for us is that if there's a big press release and then an item on the news, and it says this research was published in the Open Journal of Astrophysics instead of Nature or Science, which is usually what gets into the popular media.
Yes, but you know, I mean, this is the price of originality of making think. Nature is not open, free of charge and open access. So, I mean. Is the inertia and also the way in which inertial mentally, the inertia in minds, in which where it's in such a journal, then it's good. And when we understand the subjects, I mean, when you really understand, there are as in all journals, there are papers which are, I mean, which have not interest to be publish it in such, I mean, with such a big press and so on. By now, all journals are doing press and are doing marketing and are doing, because otherwise they cannot support, I mean, the competitivity and the cost and so on. You know that they all made aside the publication, also the press, also the summary, also the blog, also the all kinds of communication. Good, but the mean is to make the own evaluation of that and your journal. If you have a support or something like that, can I mean, can just to make more wide the existence of the journal, because as I said, for instance, in France, no, there was not knowledge of that, and in Italy too, and in Spain too. And I mean, in other countries, in Greece or in other countries on Europe, what I said, don't mention other places, other continents, I am sure. That is the question of what now, I mean, you know, inertia, or there are also conflict of interest, that there are the established that do not want competition and saying, I mean, that also, so, but in any case, is good to do. So I think that very good, Peter. Thanks you very much.
You're
And
welcome.
please send your PDF slides so you will
I'll do that
publish.
immediately so I
Yes,
don't forget.
yes. So we will place the recording. I will say we need to, well, to have the recording to receive and so on, but it's done. I mean, it's going well. And if you have whatever you want to promote or to have more results or more things in this direction or other suggestions, you know, we keep in touch. The program is running till the end of the year, and then next year we continue with the program. I mean, this doesn't stop at the end of the year, even if the end of the year announce very good.
Okay.
The closing lecture, and the closing session.
So let me wish you and all the other guests in this Chalonge de Vega school all the best for the rest of this year's series, and all the best for next year's one. I'm privileged to have been asked to do two, although they were quite different in character and in subject. So two very different talks.
It was good. As you see, it was also a discussion. It's a good, and the aim here is to give time for discussions, exchanges. This is the aim, really.
Okay, so it's almost 5:30. I'm afraid I have to go now.
As you see,
something else to do. So we've had plenty of time to talk about things. So thank you for the invitation to do a second one, and I'm going to leave now. I'll send you the PDF file as soon as
we keep in touch, and you are always welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And bye to everyone who's been here.
And if people in the audience want to say something to me, or I always, you, Peter, are free. And if people in the audience still want to exchange something, I remain here with, it's open, the Zoom, so we have time. And I see Cinciana.
Hi, Norma.
Hello,
sorry.
Cinciana.
Sorry, it's a little bit dark here where I am. I'm glad I caught you. I will send you an email with the papers, I think, tomorrow evening.
Yes, no problem. I mean, we have finished. Of course, when you send to me, I will read. I will.
Yes, because I have some question regarding one of them on how to integrate everything that we talked about. So I'll send that one first.
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know. And thank you so much for inviting us. It was very interesting. I have the same concerns as you do regarding the, I still have a little bit of light. Regarding the same thing with arXiv. You know why? Because of what happened to that.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I will start recording now. So I say to people,
it's just the two of us left.
I want to now close the session and said that we will meet here again in October, the first week of October. I think is 6 October for Kiro Komatsu, which will primordial gravitational waves, CMB, very, very important talk. And I said goodbye, and I will open, I will close the registration.